Hello, welcome back. This is, let's see, I'm not even sure what part we're on, Jackie.
My goodness, a bunch of videos in. This is your bunch of video.
Right. Okay. So we are following along in the series of creating a caring community together. And this particular video segment is about how we recognize and value everyone's strengths. So, a couple of quick notes. I'm Sally, and I'm here with my colleague and friend Jackie Joseph. Hopefully, you've had an opportunity to see, bless you, the videos around the introduction to the series and what we're talking about when we say belonging and the caring community segments. So if not, go back and watch those at your leisure. There is an activity guide that goes with this video and has links to other resources, activities you might try as a team, and some additional information. So you can find that as you're ready. And then finally, one more time, we really appreciate Rocky Mountain Human Services in Denver, Colorado for the opportunity and the funding to put this series together and make it free and available to teachers who don't get enough things free and available. So thank you, Rocky Mountain Human Services. Okay, well, let's just dig in here. This topic is something that is part of our caring communities. It's really important. And there's just a few things that we want to share about how we can teach and support children in recognizing and valuing one another's strengths. And the two main points here, the key ideas are we want to establish our space, our caring community where every child and family belongs. And so we can only feel like we belong if others recognize our strengths, that they value us for our uniqueness rather than judging our differences. And so helping children to learn how to do that is something that we can teach. This also is a way for us to model that diversity is something to appreciate and not to avoid. And so naturally, children are curious. Children are going to say things. We've all had moments, either personally or we've seen them in a TV show, or we've heard stories where we're in the grocery store and a child blurts out a question that's just curiosity. And as adults, we think, oh no, don't say that. But that's natural for children to be curious and to say what they see. And in this little segment, we want to offer you a few ideas about how to support and teach children with those experiences so that we get to that caring community. Jackie, is there anything about this that you want to set the stage around as well?
Sure. I think what we talk a lot about, Sally, when we think about this too, is we know that by the time that kids enter preschool, they're already noticing differences. It's such an opportunity, like you're saying, to help them develop positive stories and strengths-based stories, because noticing differences is part of how kids make sense of the world. And what they learn from adults is how to make meaning of those differences that they notice. I mean, we work with young children. We have and have had young children. Like you said, we might feel some discomfort sometimes, but the more that we can stay curious and then model appreciation instead of avoidance, the more that we give kids the chance to learn that our differences are our strengths, and that we all have different ways of playing and doing and learning, and that's something to celebrate and makes things better and more fun. It's not something that we want to ignore or think is bad because it's different from us or from what we've had the chance to experience yet in our life. And so just paying attention to those opportunities that come up to help kids learn that everyone contributes, everyone belongs, everyone brings something valuable to our community across all of those differences is the main point of this video, I think.
Yeah, totally. I'm giggling a little bit because I'm thinking about when I was young, we had a segment on Sesame Street. That was like one of these things is not like the other. And it made me think about how natural it is that that's part of developmental progression, is to start being able to categorize and create patterns and sort things. And so that's actually very natural. And what we're talking about is how do we make sure that when we're talking about human beings, we're keeping the focus on belonging and kindness. So a few of the ideas that we think could help, you might have others: celebrating similarities and strengths, modeling inclusive language, encouraging empathy, and building on curiosity. And we're going to give you just a couple of examples for each of these strategies as we keep moving forward. So when we think about celebrating similarities and strengths, this gives us some examples of what that might sound like. So if we're in the grocery store and a child says, "Why does she only have one hand?" rather than having that moment of, oh no, I'm sort of embarrassed that you noticed and said that out loud. I could be prepared and ready to say, our hands and bodies all look and do things in different ways. Olivia uses her hand in her own way to do things. We're just leaning in and celebrating what is the same and what is a strength here. Or if you have a child who's using an AAC device and one of the other children or students in your class says, why is he pressing buttons to talk? We might answer. We might say something like, that's his way of sharing his ideas. His device helps him tell us what he's thinking. Or however that would feel natural to what you would say, what's part of your caring community vocabulary. Another example could sound like, she's using a walker. My sister says that's for old people. That could definitely happen. I feel like we could hear that in a classroom sometime. And we might just respond with, yeah, you notice she's using a walker to help her move. Walkers can help anyone get around, just like shoes help you run or bikes help us go fast. So helping us get ready for those responses can be one of our strategies. Jackie, what else do you notice about this?
I really appreciate what you said when you said planning or having maybe some phrases ahead of time, because just like kids and how we're helping them to make meaning of and think about things in a certain way, this didn't always come natural to me, to know how to curiously listen and then reframe in a way that didn't cause a child to feel shame or think that I was saying that their thought or their question was necessarily bad. And so I really think planning ahead as a team is a really helpful strategy here. And I think that the other thing, I was talking about this with a group of people once in a presentation, and somebody raised their hand, and I was so happy that they did, because they said that there are times, or there might be times, when a child says something that's simply unkind. And in that instance, maintaining that curious perspective, but also ensuring that we're not letting harm occur in our communities is really important. And that's what that person who was in that session said. And she said that she was listening to her son in an online class during COVID, and someone said something out loud, and the teacher used a response that I'd love to share here. I think back to that a lot about what I would do if someone said something or used a word that actually truly could be harmful to one of the kids or families in a classroom. And she said that that teacher said, "You're a kind friend, and I don't think that word came from your heart. I think that word came from the outside world. And sometimes we hear things from other places that aren't caring words. I know how much you care about your friends. Can we figure out a way to make this better together?" And again, like you said, Sally, we'll all figure out a way to make that something we would actually say. But I think just that point of making sure that we prevent actual harm from happening in our classrooms is also an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I just love that story. And I think as we've been moving through this video series, you're hearing us talk a lot about keeping connection first. And in that example, the teacher really pretty brilliantly kept connection everywhere as the focal point. And so the connection to the student who said something unkind and harmful was there. Like, I believe you're a kind person, and I know that that didn't come from you. That's a connection-based response. Also, those words are harmful and they can hurt people's feelings. That's a connection-based response. And so that's how we keep belonging at the center. We're not shaming or blaming. We're learning and growing together through connection and through those experiences. It's a really great story. I'm so glad that you told it. Another thing that you're hearing and that we continue to do is just model inclusive language. And so we can choose our words carefully. We can think about what are the ways that we're saying different things. One of the things that I've learned is to describe what is happening, because that child is a child that's using a walker. Genuinely appreciating differences when we can actually value that the differences are what make our community so much stronger. That comes through in our language and comes through to children. And then celebrating how every child is unique and sort of their funny little nuanced pieces of their personality. Like when Jackie's daughter Juniper first sees me, she'll say, "Are you a burglar?" rather than "Hi, Sally." And I love that because that's uniquely June. And it's a way that she loves to connect through humor. And that's so much more fun than just "Hi, Sally."
Another thing, recently we were at June's school and we didn't even know she did this, but her friends will high five her and then they'll go, "Ow." And she thinks it's so funny. And just, I think, creating those little celebratory moments. And then kids see that and they see that their friends are funny and they have good senses of humor. And I have a couple examples here of some of these too, Sal, if you think
Great.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I think that for the first one, carefully choose words. Our recommendation would be as much as possible to keep the language or the communication centered on strengths. And so instead of saying he can't talk or she can't use her legs to walk, we could say things like he communicates with his iPad or she gets around in a bunch of different ways. And, we could build on that. Like maybe we could move into the area like she does. This is in the literature around affirming language with disability as well. People aren't confounded to wheelchairs and they're not suffering from their diagnosis. Keeping that mindset and retraining ourselves to remember it's one of the ways that we're alike and different, for genuinely appreciating differences. I was thinking about how sometimes kids might come into our classrooms and experience a friend with a difference that they hadn't understood before or they haven't noticed before. And even saying something like, this might be your first time having a friend who uses a talker or who uses an iPad to communicate. It's okay to have questions about things that are new, and we can learn with each other how it helps her do things and play that we love to do in our classroom. Just also letting them know it's okay to have questions. We all have questions and we want you to ask them. And we also want you to know that differences aren't a bad thing. It's what makes our community better. And, with celebrations, I will vulnerably again say here, there was a moment where perhaps as a mom, I was celebrating disability a little bit too hard. And my younger daughter, Goldie, who's non-disabled, started to feel bad that she wasn't disabled. That's all developmentally. I'm understanding myself. I'm understanding that people are different from me. I'm forming my sense of self. And so the point I would make here is when we think about disability as a natural way of being different and alike, it's not necessarily that we're only focusing on the strengths of kids with disabilities because of their disabilities. It truly is following children's lead and making sure we're thinking about that across all of our strengths and all of our identities. I messed that up myself as a mom and had to pull back a little bit. And we'll all do that. But I do think it's something to think about for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just the reality is this isn't how I was raised. I wasn't, and no shade to anybody in my family that did a wonderful job helping me make sense of the world. The world's changed in a lot of ways, and we're able to hear the voices of disabled people in a very cool way. And so I'm unlearning some things and relearning some things, and it's a continuous growth. Just a couple of other things that are important. When we speak about children with other adults, our words really do matter. So if Jackie and I are talking about a child, how we talk about that child is important. If I say things like, this child will never be able to participate in this activity, or they're really driving me wild today, those are conversations that are harmful, really, especially if they happen in front of children. I think that in the past we've thought perhaps non-speaking means non-understanding, and that children with intellectual disabilities or children who are autistic don't know what we're saying anyways. And what we've learned is they most certainly do. And so having the ability to presume each child's competence and speaking as if they're listening because they are is really important. Jackie, what are your thoughts about this part?
Even when we have kids who are in the back of the room pacing to participate in different lessons or doing something else at the table, they're still listening to the things that we're saying. And we've learned that over and over and over again. And how we talk about children impacts the way that they see themselves and they see their peers. And in our work, we do know that sometimes we might have to say something in front of a child. We stick to this rule that if we're not talking with a child and bringing them into the conversation that we're having, it's best to probably save that conversation for a time when the child's not present. But if we do need to speak about a child in front of them because maybe something is immediately important to the next routine or the next transition, we'll definitely want to model respect as much as possible, including the child in the conversation, or getting permission from them to communicate about them to someone else. So sometimes that looks like, hey, Mac, I'm going to let Miss B know that you're feeling really tired today. So that way she can give you extra time to use your iPad when you're ready to communicate during circle time. And I think just speaking in that way and opening up the conversation really tells kids you are part of this conversation, our community, and it lets their friends know that too. Because we've seen where kids learn to talk about their friends in front of them, or they're, again, making meaning of what it means when we talk about kids as though they're not there. We want to make sure that they know to connect and bring their friends into the conversations, and that their friends have cool play ideas and lots of great things to communicate just like they do.
I love that. Even as an adult, if, people are talking about me in front of me, I don't like that either. And so some of this is really back to that notion of like, what would help me feel belonging, and then extending that very generously to everyone in our caring classroom community. Another idea that we think is helpful around this is really encouraging empathy. And so as children grow in their ability to understand other perspectives, they learn to value differences rather than judge them, and offer that empathy that is so important to this process, to this work. And I think what's important here is noticing that it's a grow in their ability, it's a move toward, because taking another person's perspective takes time. I can say that in my marriage and family therapy training, this is something we break down as a skill. And if you've ever really been taught the steps of empathy and perspective taking, it's joining with someone, it's seeing it from their point of view, it's feeling with them, not for them, mirroring back what their experiences are. And so if this is a course in a marriage and family therapy class for master's level, soon to be therapists, I think it's helpful for us to hold that in mind for our expectations of young children, because young children will not automatically take the perspective of others. Jackie, do you want to share anything about your experiences with this?
I love that you said that empathy grows and develops the more kids have the opportunity to use it, like a muscle, right? And the more that they are supported by us to use it or try to use it as they're playing together or hear stories about it. We love to read stories and then ask kids questions. What do you think they feel? What do you think they need? Helping them even think about taking on the perspective of another person or friend. And empathy is a skill that builds over time. But what we also know is that sometimes we just expect young children to do more than what they're developmentally ready to do, not because they have a disability, but because they're a young child in general. And they're in these different stages of cognitive development and how they understand the world around them. So like 3-year-olds are still learning that other people have different thoughts from them. So empathy is going to be something we for sure practice with them, and tailoring our expectations to what they're actually probably capable of doing. First graders might be in those early stages of true empathy, but they're still developing and they still need lots of support to do that with us. 5-year-olds might be able to imagine what others feel, but still concretely and less authentically in the moment, because again, it's a muscle that they're developing, and it's also just stages of development. I think remembering that and still knowing that it's important to help them try it out and learn skills, even if they're not yet going to be able to do that on their own while they're in our care or in our classroom at all. Our job's to give them lots of chances to try it with support.
Yeah, I kind of giggle because I think our society in general has become pretty terrible at perspective taking. We get a little bit stuck in our own ways of seeing the world and forget that there are entire other perspectives and points of view and lived experiences. And so maybe that'll be a Substack post about how could we all work on perspective taking and empathy. I do want to quickly say that empathy is quite different from sympathy. And what is not helpful is for us to feel bad for another child, to have sympathy for their situation, or to project onto them some kind of grief or sadness that they might not be feeling. And so when we talk about empathy, we're not saying, that child uses a talker to communicate, or, circle time is hard for Wyatt, who's a child in a classroom who's autistic and prefers headphones. We don't feel bad for Wyatt. We feel with Wyatt that it is too loud, and we figure out together, how do we make circle time work? with one another. So I can substack about that later too. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that empathy is really being with one another. It's not a feeling for someone.
I really appreciate that. Like, empathy is helping kids get more curious about one another and then turning that curiosity into connection instead of
Yes.
feeling sorry or feeling bad. Yeah,
Totally.
that's a
Yeah.
really good point.
Yeah. And so I think the last strategy we wanted to share is around building on curiosity. As Jackie said, children are going to be naturally curious at this age. They're naturally doing that sorting of what's the same and what's different. And in this example, Jackie will tell us a little bit more about it, but this is a leaning in strategy. So this is instead of why is someone using a talker, or why is someone moving with a walker, or why did they sit at a different table, or why do they have headphones, and moving away from it, we lean in. We get more headphones so more kids can experience what does circles time sound like when we have headphones on. And we lean in and we let more kids try out adaptive seats. And so this example is that building on curiosity and leaning into it and helping them explore. And Jackie, I'll let you talk.
One thing I want to say here too is if you're listening to this and you have a preference for what to call a child's AAC device, we use the word talker because that's what Juniper, my daughter, prefers us to call it. She chose that. And so I often use that word because that's what our family uses, because that's what June asked us to use. And if your classroom or your preferences or your values are in line with using a different word, please use the word that is meaningful for you, and we'll use the one that is meaningful for us. And I think too, from an early childhood perspective, I do oftentimes hear the use of talker, not in a way to teach kids that speaking communication is somehow superior. I genuinely think that kids kind of relate to that term when they're younger. I can look into that and write a Substack on that too, though, because now I'm curious myself. But you're right. So, like, curiosity is such an important part of all of this. And children, again, are going to naturally ask questions. Hopefully, we've created a community where they feel safe to be curious and to ask questions. And maybe that's where you want to start. My kids aren't asking questions about this. I wonder how I could inspire them or create some opportunities where they might get a little bit externally or outwardly curious about some of the differences that they're noticing or the things that they're noticing in our community. And I think that listening to their questions and then leaning in and creating experiences for them to understand and meaning make in their own ways is how our caring communities becomes our own with all of us. And we can directly notice when they're curious or when they have questions and design activities. Here, kids were interested in AAC that different friends were using in the classroom. This is from AAC for All. I don't know them, but this is a great account. I'm always sharing things from this account on Instagram because their ideas are so clever. But the classroom team planned an AAC center. And so children could show an interest in learning more or exploring AAC in ways that were meaningful for them. The baby doll has a button that they press to communicate. We've done this at a school where at the program that I worked in, many of the kids had feeding tubes. And we would have feeding tubes I think we've talked about this in another video. Kids were curious about how their friends eat different from one another. And so we included it in a baby doll center as a choice for them to explore. Not necessarily this serious lesson where we were trying to get them to think about it in a certain way, but in lots of opportunities to notice it and use it and figure out for themselves what it means with our support and our facilitation to help them understand these things and these differences in a positive, strengths-based way.
Yeah, children learn through play. And so having their opportunities to explore it in their own way makes a lot of sense. And as we said before, we do have an activity guide, so you can check that out. There are links to some resources, other videos, and ways to practice the ideas that we talked about here. And that's it for this segment. We will see you in the next video.